And we are live.
All right.
Hello. Hello, Brandon.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Busy week trying to get through the year in a good way. Finish off somewhat strong and hopefully have a few minutes to hide in a little bit of winter chill before it all starts right back up again. This year went really fast in a weird way. So I'm just looking to kind of I think get my feet set again a little bit.
Okay. So the way this works is we don't talk about the usual topics.
Right.
And the way I work with this, and I explain this to every guest I have on these recordings, is that I come across things that like make thoughts, like provoke thoughts and stuff in me, and I usually connect that to somebody.
Mhm.
Because either I met them or I've seen what they do, and I think that person is the right person to talk about that topic.
Right.
So that's the way it goes. Um, Before giving you the topic we're going to discuss today, I would like you to tell us who is Brandon Parvini, but don't give me your title. I don't care about that. I don't give a F about that. You know it.
Yeah.
Uh, Give me something substantial. The idea is not talk about the online persona that people might think they know. It's the person behind the persona that I wanted them to see.
Okay. So Brandon Parvini, who the hell is he? Honestly, he's talk about myself in the third person. I, he's a self-deprecating goofball who is happy to solve problems, and I've always liked to run at stuff that I don't know how to do, and I've been that way since day one. Um, and I really don't know what I'm doing. I just have instinct that tells me what I think is the right thing, and I look for people that need help in areas. And if I feel like I can provide value or a take on it that is useful to what they're trying to do, I try to move towards that. I've always been kind of like a visual person. I don't really care much about story. I don't really care about a lot of things. Um, I've always been someone that tend to be kind of attracted to rhythm and composition. Right? I was a stupid dorky kid who drew and read comic books growing up. I probably played with Ninja Turtles too late into my childhood. Holding on to what what small ribbons of childhood I would have before starting to work probably younger than I probably should have. Um, and yeah, I'm just kind of enjoying a little bit of the journey through all this stuff. I find myself in a lot of situations that I don't really know how to handle, and so I've had to learn that you kind of build people around you that have aspects and elements of them that you wish you had. You keep those people close. They're a mirror of almost kind of, your bald spots to a certain degree. Um, and so by having these people that have these elements or this essence that you wish you maybe had more of, you keep them really, really close, and you have those conversations, and you kind of pull them in at like different ratios based upon what season you're in. Sometimes I'm a manager, sometimes I'm an artist, sometimes I'm a crisis counselor. Like I move between different things, and like the version of me that I need to be, I tend to have like these like little like bushels of people that I kind of like pull tighter towards me, so I can kind of like understand their energy and their vibes, so that way I'm better equipped to uh you know to go hard in the paint for folks and for the topics that I try to take on. Like the creative process is, I think is something that is like, I think we all do it naturally. um I think just for some of us, we've like attracted ourselves towards visual medium. um and so like those synesthetic rhymes that we come up with our head, like those of us who kind of like run it, like the visual qualities of it, and like that makes sense for us to solve for those riddles versus the same kind of creativity that I have with producers that I see, or other forms of problem solving. Like I think a lot of us are problem solvers. We just happen to be ones that run towards, you know, making an image. We know how to do that.
Okay. You know what you mentioned about like having people around you that kind of like completes you?
Mhm.
I have an analogy for that. It's like the Power Rangers, like when they all show their colors and then they like all mesh up in this kind of like giant robot, sort
Yeah.
of like
Yeah.
sort of like that.
Oh, yeah.
Um, it's funny. It's funny because this is something I noticed through the recordings. Um, when I asked this question, like most of the people you included in this one, in this case, like define themselves, they talk about the work.
Mhm.
And certainly the work is a big part of us. Um, but it's not only that. I think we're made of way more than that, which brings us to the topic of today,
Okay.
which the beginning will sound corny and the end will sound like like a heavy metal fan. The
Oh,
topic of
really?
today is finding your voice and learning how to scream. And we
Oh,
will
yeah.
get to what is what in this topic. Um,
Yeah.
so you know, it's I would say I would ask you if you could track back when you felt the urge or the birth of your creative entity. And and I'm you can go deep into this. It's
Yeah.
like we had a call with PJ from Laundry a couple weeks ago,
Yeah.
and some of the stuff for him tracked to his childhood and some problematics he had
Mm.
through his childhood. And so we can go way back if you need to.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. We do full psychiatrics. So you talk about something, even in the onset of the question of, people talking about themselves through the work, right? And it's like, well, but you're not your work. Like, what happens if you don't make another thing in your life? Is there anything left of you? Um, Process makes sense. Pro- like the world's weird. There's not right answers for a lot of things. You don't know how to do a whole hell of a lot. And when things get complicated, the work becomes simple. And so it becomes this like it's a little bit of a guiding rod. It's like a rail that you can hold on to. You can find reason and stability in a process that you understand how to do. If the world's burning, but you know how to make a drawing and you don't know how to deal with the world, you start drawing and you start doing something that makes sense and you bury your head. And, I use this analogy of like when things get tough, you'll find me digging ditches. Um, because no matter what's happening, I can just put a shovel down to a certain degree. And that process and burying that time and burying that life into that element like allows you to move forward and deal with what's happening around you. And you can process it in the kind of, the subconscious and the crocodile portions of your brain. But like by being able to kind of busy yourself through that process, it becomes this thing that you can use as a crutch to get through life in a lot of big ways. And like I've had some pretty, genuine off-roady moments in my life. I'm thankful for the life that I've had, but, it definitely started as a kid. I was, um, I had a hard time meshing in. I have a friend of mine who we would talk about this where like we always felt like we were kind of imposters and chameleons pretending to be someone just to be able to kind of like feel as though you're getting accepted, right? And I think everyone has some version of that. But like even growing up in my neighborhood, I was the only kid in my neighborhood that wasn't blonde. And so, I was the only kid in the neighborhood who didn't have a dad that was from the area growing up. And my dad, was, first generation coming in. And so like he felt like a little bit like an outsider with this kind of stuff. And things happen, bad stuff happens, and you kind of bury yourself into things. And I would bury myself into into comics and other stuff and cartoons, and but it never really fully scratched that itch. It felt like you were kind of dumbing yourself when you were just ingesting media, and my mom and my dad were really good about seeing when I was kind of like tail wagging and excited and kind of would pin my ears back a little bit. And they saw me when I'd spend like a half day, building out some really complex thing with my toys, on the staircase, and like they'd endorse it. And when they saw that I would spend, an entire day drawing, they'd endorse it. And they said, they'd kind of do the, okay, go deeper, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. And so like that idea of like, chasing that kind of creative dragon started as a coping mechanism, I think, from a young age of just being able to just do something that made sense. Do something that you could control. I can control the pencil. I could control, the marker. I could control the content that I wanted to make. And those things like that gave you that absolute power in situations where you were like largely powerless in a lot of your life. And so like the creative process was this opportunity to, to kind of make your own little world. And whatever happened, it was on you to do it. So the better you got, the more you controlled it. The worse you were, you were back in the kind of throes of the chaos of everything else. And so like for me then, like it was always this push of like, okay, cool, I'm just gonna get really good in my mind at trying to do a lot of different stuff. So when I want to go run to this other area, I can go and I can lean in and I can invest myself and get excited about learning how to do something new. And like all of a sudden, like everything else melts away. No matter what's going on, it all melts away. And you can get this flow state. And, it's a coping mechanism, I think, for a lot of us. And, and so like I could call out some, critical moment in life where like my, creative process like saved me. I'm not gonna do that. I bury my head in it and it's unhealthy sometimes. Like I've had eras in my life where I, was basically ostriching inside of the creative process because it felt good when life felt bad. But then you aren't dealing with the problems in life that you really need to be dealing with as well. So it's like that aspect of moderation then started to like really bloom, especially like in your 20s and in early 30s where you're trying to go through this stuff and like learn what um how to be an adult. That like you can't keep answering it with like, oh, I was gonna keep drawing or I was gonna keep making something or I'm gonna stay up till 4 in the morning because that felt good. It's not a matter of feeling good. It's a matter of like actually be able to solve the stuff. And so like that aspect like of problem solving, I think, is a big part of this. And like but what it does do though, like when we talk about like getting creative, going and finding kind of escapism through the creative process is giving yourself a beat to think about it, giving yourself a beat to process something. So you're not always reactionary to the moment. I know for me, I have to slow things down and I have to kind of keep things a little bit away. I can't like I'll dive in and I'll get in and grapple with topics pretty aggressively, but like I need to be able to process a little bit of what's going on to know when to jump into the pit and when you're just going to jump in and get your face pushed in, you know? And that having that process, having that work, having that thing you do, if it's making a table, if it's whatever it is, like it makes the world make sense because it gives you this keystone that you can build around.
Yeah, I will bounce on a couple things you mentioned now. The one you mentioned about like slowing down.
Mhm.
Uh, with somebody else, another guest, which the episode will come tomorrow, so I cannot just yet say who it is. Um, that person like brought something interesting. We were mostly talking about like as an age, like she drives like a studio, and we were talking about like how things are getting faster and faster on one
Mhm.
side, but then on the other hand, we need to like learn again to go slower
Oh yeah.
because keep first of all keeping the pace is not possible, and secondly, trying to keep that pace will make you take pick the wrong turns. Um, and um, and the other thing I wanted also to bounce is you mentioned using the creative process as a coping mechanism, when you were young and even maybe today. I think there's always been part of that in every creative, unless you're trying to just produce content.
Mhm.
If you're expressing yourself, you're expressing from a place where there's happiness, where there's also pain, sadness, a lot of things that like mix up and make who you are.
No, no, I mean, the creative process has a magical alchemy to it. I mean, the best albums I remember growing up were ones that came out of dark places that you'd live that people had lived through, like, there's one album, Mount Erie by, this guy, Phil Elbrum, and it's like he had like a brutal breakup and he made this like just incredible ear to ear album that like is like one of the like, 15, 20 years later, like is still something that like I'm like, well, there's just nothing else like that, and you're able to kind of galvanize and metastasize these items and kind of rather than just repress them, you can kind of transform them into something. It can become a kind of like a rocket fuel that you can work from, and I think you know that's part of the magic of like, and it's why it's funny we talk about like retirement, and the retirement really, as you get older and north of 35 to 40 and yada, and we haven't really talked about, as an industry we're still not quite sure what happens when you get too old. um and the interesting thing is like when I think about the notion of retirement, it's more of like a checkbox of like, oh, I probably should be able to retire if I need to, but it's not because I want to. It's not because I want to stop making something. Like I've been making something since the word go. When you're 5 and 6 years old, spending a day drawing, and you keep that same energy intact through your teens and your 20s and your 30s, and now as I'm entering into my 40s, and I'm like, I don't see my life out without doing that. Like I want to be making something. The day I stop making something, you probably should go and kind of like check do a courtesy knock and make sure I'm still in there. Like I want to keep doing that. It makes the world make sense to me. And so it's not, I don't, for me, there's no end in it. Like I hope to keep making until I'm way past gray. It's, because there's a plastic element of what there's an elastic kind of an elastic element to your mind that I feel like it's a creative process, and that solving problems persistently in that manner is, I don't know, for me it completes me in a really really good way. um Circling over to another, an element you brought up of like the speed at which we live and the speed at which it feels as though we're being asked to go in. I was talking a little bit about recently this book that I read, um, I um, that was describing this kind of notion of like system one, system two thinking, and I, uh, um, the name of the book is escaping me. I always want to say is like thinking fast and slow, but I don't think that's actually the name of the book. But I read it like midway through the year last year as I was like trying to kind of like do a little bit of soul searching and trying to like figure out like a better way to kind of get back to my process that I felt like had gotten a little manipulated by the demands of agency work life and like keeping a studio afloat, managing artists and everything else. And I feel like I kind of lost my way a little bit with like how I handle my process and who I was inside of there. And um it talks about this notion of system one, system two thinking. And it describes this idea that you have these two personalities in your head. System one is kind of the fast reactive one. It has high endurance and is able to kind of handle a lot of stuff over the course of the day. It's the part of your brain that knows, where the socks are in your closet. It knows like where to grab something in the drawer that's next to you. It's that first kind of instinctual reaction that can kind of go and just handle a lot of the heavy lifting for you. Then there's system two. The system two is the part of your brain that does like the long division. It's the part that like you have to really chew on stuff. It's the processing portion of it. And it's the part that really figures out like complex situations. Now, we all want to think that we're system two people. Oh, I'm a deep thinker. I really, those of us who like, fancy ourselves as like some form of an intellectual. Oh, I'm a system two people. Bullshit. We're all system one people because system two no one has the endurance to use it all day. It's not built to do that kind of stuff. And we exist in a lot of ways through the lens of this book in trying to kind of do what's called like a course pattern matching, where essentially like you look for these answers of what you've done previously. And as long as the grain is kind of matching about the same, you use the answers from that previous example for the current situation and then adapt. And so, per your previous conversation, when they're talking about like you start making the wrong calls, it's like because if we're leaning too persistently, like system one is perfect for a fast situation, for a performance based setup that you need to move quickly and you need to move instinctually. You're going to be basically riding on system one the entire time. You don't have the time to really break things down and process it and come up with a first or second thought. It's just instinct. You're just instinct, instinct, instinct. And some people's instincts are fantastic, but not everyone, right? Professional athletes' instincts are fantastic, you know, but it takes practice and it takes hardening, and you have to get really good at being able to, you know, of being able to clock the situation and size it up really quickly and not be inaccurate with what you consider that course pattern matching. If you're an engineer and you're looking at a bridge and you're trying to develop another bridge and you don't look closely enough at like other examples of other bridges that have been made, you could suggest the wrong bridge to be built and not realize that you screwed up until it might be too late. And so in the book they talk about, engineers should take caution not to think too quickly. And I think I think, for those of us in the design industry, I think we're exactly there. I think we need to take a beat and not worry so much about like flying to click, or break out the Wacom and start slashing on the screen too quickly. We've started talking a little bit at the studio now that like design is a conceptual process. It is a form of communication and it is a visual language structure. And so while we have, say terminologies of, if it's color palette, contrast, composition, all these things, but your job is to conjugate it. And you have to conjugate a sentence that someone else needs to read. And if we're all using the same words over and over and over again, then the sentences stop meaning anything. If we're communicating using the same analogy over and over and over again, it stops hitting. So as a design group, our job is to provide solutions, is to stop and think for a second and say, what is the problem I'm trying to solve? Spend a few minutes thinking, figure out what the core elements are that you're going to be bringing to the conversation. And once you feel like you've brought the right spices to it, then we can start looking to click. Then we can start looking to start pulling swipes and references. But stop and think for a second of like, what is your take? Like, what is the vibe you're trying to do here on this job? And take it from there. Then you can start looking at the actual executionary elements of it.
You know that something interesting you mentioned about this system one and system two, and I will connect it with multiple things. Is the way my brain works. Is that I I intake the information and I kind of like put it in some back part of my brain, and I do the immediate processing of it, but then I leave it like leaving there for a bit, you
Hmm.
know, and then I give it time to connect that thing with other things that in the beginning seemed completely unrelated,
Hmm.
but in fact like have similarities and help you create the metaphor of what you were asked initially. And this is a conversation that came up with Ryan Summers, where he was saying like, yeah, when I start working on something, I like to look all the trends and all the things and all the inspirations, and he creates kind of like this collection where
Mhm.
he will draw inspiration. And I was like, man, I just do the exact opposite. Like I run the other fucking way as far as I can, because I don't want to be influenced too much by things that I will end up in a way or another. I wouldn't say copying, but just emulating, because even if you don't want to do the same, they have an influence on you.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so in fact, when I start working on something, I start when I start looking for inspiration. I don't, for example, if I have a project about a car, I'm not going to start looking at cars or car commercials or car designs. I will start looking at something totally unrelated, until at some point I will go like, huh, this thing makes me think to that thing.
Mhm.
If I combine them, and then from that, like, comes up something new,
Well,
like something that is like wasn't expected.
there was a, there was a,
And that's and that system too. That's the system too in the
yeah,
back of my head that keeps on like chugging, chugging, chugging. I don't pay attention to it. But at
yeah,
some point it goes like, "Hey, sorry to interrupt, but I have something here." It's like,
yeah. Well, I mean, here's the thing is that there's this act of like figuring it out, right? But I mean, there's even a shared weight that even in what you're describing, because when we're talking about like that course pattern matching, like being able to kind of keep going and putting the swatches against it, but this goes over to another thought of like, thinking about how the mind works. And there was a really cool, I think it was BBC had done this like talk with this guy Villanor Ramachandran, and he was a neuroscience expert, and he was talking about the idea of like art and creativity and beauty through the lens of neuroscience, and um, and it was an incredible talk. I listened to it, I think, at just the right time in my life to like, at one point I was like, maybe I should get into neuroscience. Like this seems really interesting. And then I realized I don't think I have quite the stomach for that. But it was one of those things. They're talking about the aspect of like synesthesia, right? The cheese is sharp. And it's a very simple, like fundamental thing that we all do is like building analogous to help communicate something that is abstract in its nature. And we all do it. And giving yourself the opportunity to maybe find like the cross comparison that might be like the second or the third or the fourth take on this thing, not the first, right? Like looking deeper, finding more pick points in the conversation. Who's the person that's asking me? Who are we trying to talk to? And and look, and it's not the fact that like we all have to be, you know, brilliant auteurs. We're not, but being able to even like go back and forth, like once you start the conversation and then you start doing some swipes and you start doing some references, you start looking at some other things to try to like kind of cue you off, and then you're like, yeah, I feel like I should go somewhere else, and then you go back, you can circle back around again and say, okay, maybe I need to be thinking about this from a different lens. Maybe I need to be pulling in some different references. Maybe I need to be looking at this world through a different setup. If everyone right now, I thought I had a good idea, and then all of a sudden I go out and I feel like I see 15 people doing it the same way. Okay, let's stop, let's back up a little bit, and let's take it from a slightly different approach, right? So it's like you have this ability to kind of go out, test the theory, run against it, see what culturally we're doing, and then say, okay, I don't know, okay, this group wants that. So if that's what everyone else is doing, and this group wants that, and they're here for a hamburger, I need to give them a hamburger, like that's fine. Because we also need to make sure we don't outthink the room, because that's also where we can get ourselves, and more importantly, when you're a project lead, the people who follow you in trouble. If we tell everyone behind us, this is the place to go, and you've completely ignored warning signs coming into there, not only have you led yourself astray, you've put other people in jeopardy too. And so like, there's a responsibility as a lead to not set anyone else up for failure if you possibly can avoid it. Like you're trying to persistently set people up for success. You're trying to, if you're going to ask people to be making sandcastles on the beach, don't put it right by the water. you know, Give them a spot that they can do it, that they have time to build it, that they have time to do it, and that it's actually going to have a chance to live. Don't put them in harm's way.
Like this brings me to one of the questions I had planned sort of like to discuss with you is that like from seeing you giving another talk, I know you have a strong personality and strong opinions and
Shucks.
probably that's that's not true. Like
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
and like when we go through our youth, like we're very adamant of our opinions and we think we figure out the whole universe. But now you're talking about something completely different, which is like finding middle ground between your artistic vision and what is a commercial relationship
Mhm.
with a client. And and I would like to know when, because I'm pretty sure you had probably fucked up a couple of projects because you went too far into your own vision. We all did.
What are you talking about?
Never.
Never. Never.
Um, and so I'm interested in the moment, if we can go back to that, where you went like, yeah, that wasn't great. I should change a couple things here and there to make sure that this doesn't happen again. You don't have to talk about the situation, but I just want to talk about like the mental, like the inner thoughts that went through you in that moment, because this is going to be watched by people that are, of course, already in the industry for years, but also like people that are like learning or young. And I do believe that these are topics that don't get discussed enough. Sure, we'll say, oh, we have to find compromise and blah, blah, blah. But we never talk about what's behind the curtain and what the moment where that slapped us in the face and we went like, yeah, I better kind of like fine tune it.
Yeah, I think confidence is a big thing, right? If when we look at ourselves through the notion of being a supposed expert in a field, right? Like you don't want to hire a bad carpenter, right? So even if you think you might not be the best carpenter, you need to pretend like you are when you're walking the client through it. And that's there for a couple different reasons. One, if you're second guessing yourself when you're in the middle of cuts, you're not going to make great cuts. Two, if the person who's showing up handing you cash to do something is seeing you waffling and second guessing yourself, they're going to be concerned that maybe they went to the wrong person. And so then when you have prescribed approaches, they're going to begin to second guess you as well. And then all of a sudden now you're in like a contentious relationship because now there is a vacuum of leadership that's existing inside of the relationship. So in general, a lot of people will propose this notion of confidence. Go in confident, go in confident. Um, the but nothing's binary. You you got to be worried about hubris. And I think that in my youth, hopefully it was just my youth. I need to do an audit. um, uh, um, you know, that hubris can lead you astray. The focus on being right, on like gutting out and like forcing yourself to be right, in the face of all other fact and information, I think can be a dangerous thing. Um, and that kind of overconfidence that can, you know, the overconfidence is important though early because that's what actually gets you in trouble. If you go through life super cautiously and you don't take those risks and you don't fail, then you never then you're missing out on a lot of good learning opportunities. And like that hubris early is important. There's a reason why you think you're unkillable as a kid is because like that's the time that you can mess up and break something and the stakes aren't so high. You heal pretty quickly. You bounce back pretty quickly. if life was set up where you're making more mistakes late when it takes a month and a half, 2 months, a year to heal, that can knock you out of the game altogether. And so, like, when I talk about failing early and failing often, it's like you're trying to get that stuff out of the way. Otherwise, you're going to have to go through life kind of cautiously. And, and so that hubris is really, really important. But I think that those major mistake points are essential. I look back and I think about I think about projects like that where I was so dead set on being right that I potentially took us into a bad patch, and then I had to basically help pull us out of there because I felt personally responsible for having led us to there. Now, truthfully, I think that's a newer thing though, because when I came up, my issue was not being too brash and bold with you know, with a hot take. It was frankly being too meek and being too accommodating because of the fact that I felt as though I was a fraud the entire way through. I didn't study under someone else. Like the people I studied under were like in the fine art world, which had nothing to do with the design world that I would end up showing up in, right? You know, entering in through VFX and things like that, and then eventually making my way over to this motion design world. Like, I didn't I didn't come up as a junior under someone else. I literally showed up because I knew I had a laptop and After Effects installed, and was too stupid to say I didn't know how to do something. So I was just willing to take it on, realizing I probably didn't know how to take it on, but I told someone I'd do it. So now I got to do it. And so that kind of that doubt and that fear that like I really don't know what I'm doing made me largely affable to a lot of bad situations. And that was actually the biggest thing. I learned confidence over time. It wasn't a matter of being brash and braggadocious from the get. It was actually being too much of a milk toast to keep my people safe. And so like so worried about like, oh, if I don't, if I say that that's a bad idea, or if I don't tell them yes, they're never going to come back and work with me again. They don't like me. The conversation got weird and now they're not having fun and now they don't call back again. And you let yourself get abused. You let someone, all of a sudden, you have basically passengers in the plane knocking on the door saying you should fly the plane like this. And next thing you know, you're nosediving. And it's 100% your fault because you let someone else into the cockpit. You let someone else start dictating a process that they knew nothing about. They didn't know the risks. They didn't know what was going to happen. And it wasn't theirs to own when it screwed up. They were more than happy to point a finger at you and said, you screwed this up. You did. You let them come in. You let them tell you how this had to go. I've learned how to be direct with age because, and I don't even do it for myself, honestly. Like, I think most of us, I think, are bad at protecting ourselves. I'm much better though at protecting my people. If I've asked artists to join me on something, and my client it's not bad intentions, but if the person I'm working with who is illiterate to our process, illiterate to how we do things, or even if they think they're literate, comes in and starts proposing a path that could put any of my people in trouble, that's on me to take care of them. That's on me to tell this person, no, that's not how we're going to do this. And I need you to be calm and let me get you through this. The idea of like being a good Sherpa, in this process that is very much like crossing the Rubicon, little mini or long versions of it is very accurate in my mind because there's only one way through this, right? There's no turning around. Once you embark, you get going, and everyone who's joined you on this run is stuck with you on this path that you've chosen to get through here. And if you're going to have to make pivots, changes and things like that, like you're probably going to burn resource in doing so. So it's like that confidence has really come later because of the fact that you were too nice up front. You were too accommodating up front. You know, like I use this adage a lot of like, it's all good, brah, until it's very much not. And like that very much not, that was the thing that I think was indicative of my youth more than anything else, was the good times parade for 6/10 of a project, 7/10 of a project, and then just brutal, brutal weeks of that last chunk that was awful because you let too much stuff slide. You were too cool and too nice to say we're falling behind. That what you're doing isn't good enough, or hey, get the hell out of my kitchen. We're cooking. Stop changing the meal in the middle of this. I know what I'm doing and we'll get ourselves there, but you need to back off. Like, and figuring out even how to say it, how to say it with a smile, how to say it in an effective manner that doesn't
Please,
piss people
please.
off. Yeah, please F off.
Um,
Go get yourself a soda out front and leave me the F alone. But whatever the case is, it's like that, it's figuring out those mechanisms though. Like, how can you engage in good process overarchingly? How can you keep your people safe, and like figuring out whatever it is you need to do. If it's that you need to think about the kids at home that you need to bring home like a stable paycheck for, if it's your own self-interest, if it's the people that you brought with you, if it's the overall, quality of the end product, however your totems are stacked in value, it's figuring out how you're defending and protecting them, because you're playing a chess game that's gonna play out over a course of time, and everything that in that process you're setting up is surrounded by entropy and surrounded by pitfalls. And the more people you bring into it, the more risk you have. It's very simple to dig a ditch by yourself. It's very simple to just go through and just nose down, make something bit by bit by bit by bit by bit, right? And it's getting exponentially more complicated as you bring more people in. And so like you have to think about it from a slightly different lens as you kind of engage with that to a certain degree.
so it's interesting because the conversation kind of like shifts from not only the um how do you tone down or tone up some things, but it also means that like whatever voice you found, it has evolved through
Hmm.
time.
Oh yeah.
And I always say, we have multiple voices. So we can talk, we can sing, we can scream. And so part of the things you were describing were, some of it is like the internal talk you have with your team. Others, so that's one voice. Then you have another voice, which is more like the business side of it with your client, which is can be very concealing, but sometimes can be also like very strong and seem like there's a limit you should not cross
Hmm.
because that's off limits for you. Um, and so could you maybe talk a little bit about, you don't have to give me 10, but I would say one or two events that shaped your voice, stuff that you remember that it changed you on the way your voice or your creative voice articulates itself.
Um,
Take your time. You don't have to,
yeah.
again, be, you can be system 2 a little bit.
Yeah. I remember learning how, when I was doing like a lot of music industry stuff, um, you'd be in these meetings with people who were very, very cool, much cooler than you, much cooler than you'll ever be. worst day, they'll be so much cooler than you'll ever be in your life. They'll matter more. They'll touch more people. They'll have more engagement with other folks. They're, and you're in there like a booger, trying to tell them what to do with themselves. I mean, I'm in my 20s, early 30s. You're sitting in these rooms with these folks, and I remember some that did not go well. That we were we're sitting there with my partners and we're trying to like make them happy and we're trying to kind of tell them what they want to hear and trying to play to them. And and I remember there was a couple of these meetings that we would have where we kind of had clocked that they were going better. And they were going better when we were talking about a little bit of what inspired us versus trying to kind of like have like a complete answer. I started learning that these people wanted to feel as though like they had a voice and that they had a bit in the creative process. And so I learned to start having conversations with people rather than pitches. So that way they could basically like kind of co-invest in wherever it was that we were going. And so like I might show elements, I might show things that we can play with, areas that I like to explore, things that are conversations that we're not going to get right now, and not put the pressure on ourselves to be complete. And and in seeing that changed how people would engage with me, and that all of a sudden I was not a vendor, I was a partner with them on this journey. I was like, I never again want to be a vendor. I never again want to give someone a complete answer. I want to have a strong take of these are the ingredients we should be talking about. But I want to understand what your take is on this. I want to understand this relationship with you and understand where we're trying to go and what we're trying to answer for. And that began to kind of change my foothold a little bit of how I would be approaching people in terms of solving for the creative ask that's happening in front of me. And then there's like one meeting I remember where I where there's a big group of people. A lot of them were incredibly senior from me, and my group was like one very small part of this very large pie, and everyone's trying to kind of figure out some significant issues that they're trying to deal with. And I was tracking with what everyone was saying. I was understanding of I was empathetic to the issues that everyone was talking about. And I was like, these people need like a better like central answer. Can I be that connective tissue? And so I sat there quiet and listened and tried to like really internalize what everyone was saying. And then realizing that if I don't talk now, though, in the room where everyone's here, that we can cut through the crap and not get trapped now in basically a chain of phone calls and emails that would never have this idea go through. I have to just kind of say the stupid thing out loud right now and be okay to be wrong. And if they say I'm wrong, that's fine. But let's just say it and put it out there. And if someone else takes the idea and says it's theirs, that's fine too. But this is the right answer. And so I remember, putting my hand up and saying, can I say a few words, and pitched a different financial approach to how we should be handling, this problem that we were all dealing with. And all of a sudden, everyone took on ownership over it. Oh, well, if we do this, and there's a lot of yes ands, and I realized kind of right then of like, again, trying to be respectful of everyone's space, of not speaking out of turn. Like sometimes you just have to say the thing too. And sometimes that earnest, direct answer said from a place of just genuine consideration for the wellness of everyone else. Like you just have to say it. It's not a matter of hurting feelings. It's not a matter of upsetting people. If you're, as long as you're saying it with good intentions, for me, that's enough. And so just get the idea out there. Say the stupid thing up front and let them react, and have the confidence in what you're bringing to the table to say, okay, well, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But let's at least get this idea out there versus like waiting to like carefully like debut something later that maybe won't bump it or ruffle as many feathers. Like just say it, because everyone, like, it's either going to work or it's not going to work, but get the idea out there, like having the confidence to just like get that out there. And so I think that idea of like directness of like, you know, making sure you're listening, making sure you're not too quick to talk. But then once you've had a chance to, to kind of process some of this stuff, like getting it out there and trying to actually like in the moment help the situation, like between those two kind of pick points, like I realized that my voice would be found in this idea of like being willing to put myself out there and get punched if that's what it takes. And then in turn have a conversation. Like being okay to be, if I'm gonna, it's okay for me to be persistently wrong if I'm getting us to where we need to be.
Yeah, I
And
always say I always say the worst thing that can happen is they say no. It's
right,
like that's the worst thing that can happen to you. It's like you're not like you're not gonna die, or there's
right,
nothing like dramatic that's gonna happen. So like
yeah.
the stakes are not that. I mean, they can be high in some aspects, but like personally, as a human being, they're not that high.
Well, it's just I also feel like people just react well to genuineness. Like if you're not overtly calculated, and you come off, overtly calculated, and you can feel a little more casual with folks. Again, it's a conversation. What if? And I think that's, it's a great place to be, because then you have a dynamic, fluid relationship with everyone that's involved, where we feel like ideas can flow freely, and you know, it's a good place to be.
Part of what you're saying here is to me what I call so carving your seam. It's like finding your place,
Mhm.
and that takes time and work. Um, and now we will get into the screaming. Um, there's like we, and this is connected to the faster piece of things we talked earlier to like today is there's like a humongous amount of noise, a lot,
Mhm.
and in many aspects, and so for our voice to be heard, we need to scream. And I'm not saying this in a negative way. This is not
Yeah,
like don't imagine like history, like hysteria. Sorry,
yeah, yeah.
it's more like, and there's different ways of screaming. So you can scream for attention. You can, and so about that, like digging that seam, like marking that seam, and with that voice like screaming to be heard, like cut through the noise. Um, because you when and I'm going to say this from an artistic perspective, you have a strong voice. When I go and see your work, or see the work you've been involved with, um, your voice is very present there. And so, how do you cut through the noise? And that noise can be just for people to hear you, or also for you to be able to hear others.
Yeah. I worry I'm a contrarian by nature. Um, contrarianism is like not necessarily, is that a word? I don't know, but like you don't want to be someone who's like always trying to basically like say opposite or go, in the hope of being iconoclastic. But that's the goal, right? Like for me, the goal is not necessarily to have a pop hit, but to maybe be for like a brief fleeting second, to even be in the surrounding zone or ecosystem of something that feels as though it's a little against the grain and feels a little different. And so there's this like very concentrated approach of like what's, in order to like, there's that book Making and Breaking the Grid, that like you can't go through and suggest, in our situation, I can't suggest something that's antithetical to what the traditional approach should be if I don't understand what the correct approach is. If I don't know what they really want and what the obvious answer is, then now I'm stuck at chance. If I'm trying to have something that feels as though it's antithetical or iconoclastic, it's like you have to be able to understand the pick points here, right? Like, so you have to be able to first understand what is the correct answer. Where is the grid? What does the grid suggest the correct answer is? Then, once you have that, you can then begin to play, and you can begin to kind of, and like I'll talk about this notion of kind of you keep rotating the cube over and over and over again to see if it looks different on a different side, right? And so like that for me is always the opening process is like, okay, the direct answer is to do this thing. Can I start like flipping switches along the way and find maybe something that's going to look a little weird or a little bit different that's going to pervert the process in an interesting fashion that's going to yield a result that's going to maybe feel a little bit different. And so there's play. Like, I'm confident in the process. I know we're going to do it. I know we're going to be able to make it. That's not the problem. The problem is what we're doing worth making. And so trying to cross-check whatever it is that we're doing with that energy to make sure that whatever we're doing is worth making. Like, I'm a tremendous fan of of what I shudder to call them peers, but like other people in our industry that I don't want to make a piece that even gets close to a G-Monk piece because G-Monk should do that. Like, Nydia should do the piece that Nydia does. And if you want me to do a piece that looks like a Nydia piece, I'm just going to say you should go work with Nydia. She's going to be an amazing person to work with. And you'll have a better relationship. But if you want me, I'm going to do me. I'm not going to do anyone else. And, if you want me involved, I'm going to be present inside of there. And so that means that you're going to take me for my whole bushel of references, that I'll be talking about Chris Cunningham, and I'll be talking about Labius Woods, and I'll be talking about the people that inspire me. And you'll find their line forms, and you'll find their shapes, and you'll find their textures and their tones, and it's all going to show up in my work because, again, I keep I people in my life that I keep close to me, but then I have my references, and I have the things that inspire me, and I have the things that I wish I made. The competitive shithead that I am, I wish I made that thing. Like, there is that competition. Like, I remember being a pup and looking at the Chris Cunningham stuff and being mad that I didn't make it. It was so cool. And it gave me such the feels that I wanted to have that I was pissed that someone else had already made that in the world and that I would never make that. And so there's a gold rush. Like, you're trying to find your little gemstone somewhere in the woods, but it means you got to go running. It means you got to go looking. It means you can't be going where everyone else is at, because the chances of you finding the gemstone where everyone else already is low. But if I want to find something special, if I want to find something precious, if I want to find something that gives me those feels and has the conversations inside of it that I want to have, the only way to do it is to go somewhere else. And to be trying to look at something that feels different. So then that way, I'm not getting modeled against other people. I'm not getting modeled against other creative that's doing the same. Because now I'm in a fail race, right? There's this notion of red water, blue water. You go into red water, you understand this idea of how much something, what something looks like. There's competition. You don't have to invent everything, but it's a race to the bottom, right? There's high competition. People are already there, and you have to fight and get on top of that competition. It's not that I'm opposed to competing. I love competing. I just would rather, if I'm going to work that hard, I'd rather be going somewhere that maybe everyone else hasn't isn't really pushing towards right now. That feels like that helps complete the landscape. That helps complete the overall, dynamics of, as a field, what we're currently looking at.
Is this in any way or shape related to, and there's no good and bad answer to this. It's just who we are as humans. But is there any correlation with the necessity to have some recognition on your side?
No, no, it's I really actually struggle with recognition for it. Like, honestly, even being on a, an inner, talking with you, knowing it's being recorded, and that I'm suggesting that this is worth anyone else listening to, I struggle with.
Don't
I have
worry, we'll cut half of it. Don't worry.
perfect. Like, I love having a conversation with you, but for me to tell someone else you should listen to what I have to say, I'm like, well, I don't know how I feel about that. For me, I'm trying to evoke an emotional response out of myself. And I'm trying to elicit an emotional response from someone who might look at this. That's the goal. So, and I know that it, if everyone is consuming something consistently, it's going to be very, very difficult for me to pop out of the white noise if I continue to feed them what they've already been eating. But if I give you something different that your taste palette has not become a kind of attuned to, I have a better opportunity to either have you hate it or love it, but damn well gonna remember it.
Yeah, it's fun that you bring that thing because I have a very similar analogy when, especially when talking about agencies, when agencies are in the middle of you and the client,
Mhm.
and the agencies love sometimes to put themselves on the seat of the client and say like, "Oh, but the client is not going to like this," or
Right.
the client is, and in my head, I'm like, "You don't know, like
Mhm.
you've been serving the client potatoes for like 20 years now." So, sure, if we want to make them try caviar, we're not going to give them a full spoon in one go. But little by little, let's make them taste other things.
Yeah.
And like you say, they might reject it, or they might suddenly go like, "Well, this is pretty good. Like, do you have more of this?"
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
and then you're opening doors to make something different or something new,
Right.
which that's the quest. I wasn't implying that there was a need of recognition on your side. I was just asking because
Dare you.
if you would have, if
Dare you.
I know, I'm terrible, but I was asking because other guests have said like, yes, there was a need of recognition at some point, and even myself, I know that through some years in my youth, I needed recognition because I had gone through a lot of crap and difficult times before, and I felt I was in a bad place, and so I needed to feel valued. And I needed people to go like, "What you're doing is good." You
I
know,
th-
I don't, so it was a question, like a legitimate question, which would, like I said, it's not, there's not like a good or a bad answer because we all come from different places. And this is the reason of these talks is to people that like, because people only see online the end result.
right.
They go to see your work and you see all these amazing pieces. And sometimes that can crush you down
Oh yeah.
because you go like you just said with Cunningham, like, I had the same thing when I saw the work from Cunningham, I was like, "Holy shit," like, first of all, how did he get there? And, like, I will never be able to make something like that. And
Yeah.
certainly, I'm not him, so I make different things.
Right.
But with time,
There's a chance. That there's an altruistic falsity in me saying that it wasn't about recognition. I'm a designer's designer. It's who I want to be. I don't care if a client likes me. I don't care if I'm ever popular, but I want people to want to work with me. And when I say people, I'm talking about other artists. I want people to be excited to collaborate with me. and I want people to be excited to be on my team. And maybe that's because I was a kid who got picked last at kickball growing up, but I don't give a shit what the client thinks most of the time. I'm not pitching to the client, I'm pitching to the audience that I think they're trying to connect to. And I'm doing it thinking about who I want to have to work with me on this thing. Oftentimes. I do a lot of projects solo. Those are fun. But that to me is like basically art. You know, that's like a finger paint art project when I'm just working by myself because there's very little skin in the game. It's just my time, just my life, you know? But when it's other people's time and other people's life, that becomes a little bit more dangerous. And so like for me, like, you know, when you talk about the notion of recognition, like I want other artists to be stoked to jump in with me and be like, I'm going to have a good time. He's going to help keep me safe. And I'm going to be excited about where we go. That's it. Like, I want them to be excited about what that process is. I want them to be excited that they feel like they're going to be able to take ownership and that I'm going to hopefully open maybe a couple doors to places that they haven't been let into yet. And if I can do that, rad. I'll get mine in the process. I'll get mine no matter what. That's preternatural, right? You feed yourself kind of naturally. You breathe without thinking. And so I've been doing this long enough that I'll make sure that like I have my fun, I get my ideas in there, and that's going to happen naturally. I focus on others and making sure that like this is going to be a good ride for everyone else to be part of. And that what we're doing is interesting enough that it's worth their time to show up.
Okay. Interesting. Now we're talking. Now we're getting to the meat of the subject.
That's probably disappear in about 10, 15 minutes, flagging.
Yeah, we'll start landing the plane slowly. Um so we've talked about the past and we've talked about the present. And now, as in every episode, I would like to talk a little bit about the future. So I have two questions for you about the future now. And one is, we mentioned that thing that goes very, very fast and we react to it, and then our system too kind of like cope with it and,
Yeah.
lags behind. So my first question is like, what's your queued pipeline in your system too? What's queuing there to be processed? And
Hmm.
and the second question is like, where are you going tomorrow? You
Tomorrow?
don't have to give. I mean, if you don't have a clear answer, you can ramble. It's like it doesn't matter. But it's like, no, like you probably know very well what you're doing today, but you probably also know where you want to be tomorrow. So yeah,
Yeah.
where are you going tomorrow?
Uh, there's a lot of logistics, I think, these days in my head. With the group that I'm at right now, we're we're busy, and that's good. Work is very uh it's easy for it to take over your life and for it to kind of like really put a set of blinders on you. I think right now what I'm trying to do is really focus on turning this into a system that doesn't feel like everything's long division to figure out. And so when you're asking like what are you processing in the back of your head? I'm now that I'm dealing with this a setup that I have a lot more people that I'm working with and feel personally responsible to, and that there's just not literally enough hours in the day to get to everyone in the way that I want to. Um, I have to think differently and I have to adjust my gait, and it's uncomfortable. And I'm trying to keep that, I'm trying to keep who I am and who I've always been, which is this kind of quiet artist listening to music and making pictures and people saying, good job, I like your pictures, you know, to someone who can successfully do that for other people, that like I can give you that moment that I really cherished. for me, and learning that balance. You know, I I'm trying to build up that division. I'm trying to get that setup going. I'm trying to get people feeling good in that kind of rhythm. And there's a lead the horse to water, but can't force them to drink kind of aspect. But like, I'm trying to make sure that I'm doing as much as I can right now to do that, because if everyone else can be more autonomous, if everyone else around me can work without the same level of management that I feel like I have to do at times, then that gives me time back in my life. And then that gives me the opportunity that maybe I can go and make a pretty thing because I have that time back in my life, you know? But like there is this like trade-off of like the more people think that you're good at what you do and the more people want your take on things, then you have to then balance that out with like how much time do you have in the day, right? And um, and I'm a dad. I got 2 kids and they want attention too, and they want to do fun stuff and they want to have a life with me. And you know, you're trying to be you're just persistently trying to not fail someone, right? You too focus too much at home, and all of a sudden you're not quite like fully showing up, you know, at you at work. You're too much at work. You're phoning it at home, and so you're in this setup here in our modern moment where everything feels like it's happening so fast. And you're just trying to slow it down anywhere you can to feel as though you're having like a genuine moment, or either in the studio, digitally or not, or at home, you know? Um, but it's a different riddle to solve and it's a different problem to solve. I'm gonna solve it for me, but I think that's kind of where I am right now, you know? Um, there I'm moving into a different season of what my life is. And so I'm just trying to be patient with myself as I kind of get through those weeds, um, and try not to bring too much anxiety to the decision making that I'm having to make.
Yeah, I think what you're mentioning there is just priorities. Like our priorities like change through
Mhm,
time. I have a kid too, and so I feel exactly what you're saying is when it started I was too much at work
mhm.
and missing out stuff. And so I had to balance out my priorities differently. And the more you go through it, like those priorities change and you go like and it doesn't mean that the priorities you had years back were not the proper ones.
No,
It's just that at that time with the tools you had, that was your goal. And as you grew and went through processing things, you went like, okay, this is not anymore the place where I want to be. I would like to be more like over here.
yeah,
Let's start sliding over there.
yeah.
Um,
You don't have to be married to your answers. The answers should evolve based upon how your goals change. You know, I mean, look, if life was about just going to, let we keep using food analogies, but it's like the decision yesterday was, was to get Lebanese food. Today, it might be sushi. Doesn't mean that yesterday was wrong. It's just that was the goal. You hit it, you got it, you enjoyed it or didn't. Now we're here. You have to be married to your, and that's where like that process makes perfect kind of aspect comes into play. I don't need to worry about my answers. I need to worry about how I came to my answers. Why was I thinking that way? And like that's like the self-reflection that I think is like the big thing that I really cue in on, and I think is like a major driving force for me is I don't care what my answer was. The answer is whatever. It's built on a combination of luck, chance, and situation. Why did I come up with that answer is actually the bigger thing that I'm kind of persistently looking at. Because if I can adjust, or if I can think about or be aware of why I'm coming to those answers, why am I being attracted to those things? Why is that my take? I have a better opportunity to potentially change the threads of directionality and potentially can not repeat a mistake or change a pattern that maybe I would wished was different.
Yeah. I will make like a music analogy. It's like bands as they release albums and then people complain. It will like, yeah, they completely lost
And
their way. Like this doesn't sound at all like the first album. And I'm like, well, like thank of course, like,
thank God.
and I'm happy. My God, like it's like if it's would still sound like the first album, that means they're stuck in a loop, and then there's no evolution.
Right.
So man, I would like to thank you for being around here, spending
Yeah.
some time with me. I would say stay loud, keep screaming. It's good. It's good screaming. Um, and I don't know. I will lead the closing to you. If there's anything in particular you would like, any idea or thought that came to you through this conversation, you would like to end this recording with.
I like that we had a conversation about the creative process that didn't talk once about a pixel or an aesthetic or anything else.
That was the point.
The again, starting the idea of design, starting this idea that design is an abstract concept and is a problem solving system that like you can, we think about this idea that we design answers, right? We conjugate solutions based upon ingredients and elements that are given to us. And that is a conceptual and abstract thing that's happening that then precipitates a production and executionary phase. And if we can think about it from like that kind of like a staging of it, like that's the biggest thing I'm trying to do with my folks that I talk to on a daily basis is, are we thinking enough about what our solutions are, not to have decision paralysis that we're spending too long doing it, but just give yourself a beat before you hop in there, without losing your momentum. I think if we in general, you know, are spending at least a little bit of a beat on that, I think there's an opportunity to discover some new stuff, and that for me would be the most exciting part.
My previous guest, she said something really interesting. She separated us into categories. She said there's artists and there's designers.
Hmm.
Like the artist makes art for himself
Hmm.
and puts it out in the world expecting somebody will buy it or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then designers are like problem solvers.
Yeah.
Like we figure it out problems and we find solutions. And
Yeah.
those solutions have many shapes and many forms.
Yeah.
Um, and the reason I didn't mention like a pixel in their whole call, and I don't mention that in any recording, it's because I'm not interested into making another tutorial.
Right.
I don't want. Otherwise, I would have like reached out. It's like, hey man, let's deconstruct this project you did. Like you showed. Like no, there's enough of that.
Yeah.
Going to your contrariism thing you were saying, it's kind of like similar with me. I don't want to be doing something. There's a million out there because
Mhm.
that doesn't bring any value to anybody.
Yeah.
I'm trying to make these so people can find meaning or answers to struggles they are going through themselves. And because like you said, you didn't had a mentor or like you weren't like a junior with somebody else on top
Mhm.
giving you cues or directions. And I think many of us were in the same situation.
Yeah.
Um, and some of us are lucky enough to kind of like find a needle in the haystack and kind of like dig through it, but some others might be still like searching for it.
Yeah.
And kind of like this is the goal of these things.
No, exactly. Look, if something that someone else says rhymes with something you're thinking, at least you're not nuts. May not be your answer, but at least you're not nuts.
Yeah, correct. Brandon, thank you for being with me.
Of
And
course. Yeah.
I hope to see you around soon.
Yeah. More soon.